Okay. Our syllabus has 3 main areas. We have audit, that is audit theory, audit of financial statements. Though there is some audit, internal audit component under that. So the main perspective of this paper is external audit. Okay? That one is very, very important, especially for those who are doing internal audit work. So if you have that background, it helps you to know how the paper flows. Then we have professional ethics and values. And this is implied in many other papers, only that for our paper, they examine it a lot. It's a big component of the syllabus that we must appreciate. And lastly, the entrepreneurship part. So for each of these 3, I'm going to go slightly into details so that when it comes to going through paper, the last sitting, November 2019, at least we have an idea about this paper. I'll start with entrepreneurship. I am glad to note that the Institute is not just training us, but they are preparing us to be employers. Okay, to be able to create wealth, to be able to create businesses, to be able to create employment. So in this paper, it introduces us to different business ventures, business ideas, the type of organizations we can come up with, the advantages and disadvantages of each. This paper helps us to know how to get finances to support our businesses, how to grow our businesses, how to grow our wealth. Okay, so under that part of the paper, entrepreneurship, we should also know how to maintain those businesses. So that is basically the component of that. Of course, as you maintain the business, it is important for you to keep evaluating. Consider the challenges of businesses, okay, and try to maintain that business. The second part is professional ethics and values. It forms a major part of this paper, or paper 12. And in this paper, there's a lot we are supposed to look at. One, I want to first refer it to the business we have started. If you start your business, it is important that you run it ethically. You do what is expected. What do we mean by ethical practices in business? You don't harm the environment, you don't abuse the environment. In other words, you conserve the environment. Issues to do with wasteful disposal or carbon emissions, those ones should be reduced. So that part of ethics introduces us to that, business and ethics. That if we have our businesses, or if you are going to audit someone with a business, do you consider their environmental footprint? Do you look at how the business affects the environment? So we consider both social and environmental matters in a business. How does it treat its employees? Is there any form of sexual harassment, workplace harassment? Okay? Do they have protective gears? Does that business work in public interest? So there is that part of the business that looks at the environment, okay? Environment per se. And then if we have business, of course, I've already talked about this ethical behavior at workplace. That part of the syllabus has the workplace ethics, sexual harassment or workplace harassment and all those things. And all those are examined in detail when it comes to the paper. So for any business to grow, it needs good leadership. It needs good management. And that's where corporate governance comes in. Now, corporate governance is about the codes of ethics, those corporate codes, the King 3, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the SOX, and other codes. It is about the roles of the board, the role of management, the role of the chair, company secretary. It emphasizes the need of having an internal audit function. Basically, it's about the control environment, ensuring that a business is well managed, is well governed. You have started your business under entrepreneurship, but the paper also wants us to know how to go about doing business. And in case of any unethical practices, there should be channels of whistleblowing. Now that requires us to know the Whistleblowers Act. So our businesses should ensure that we don't engage in fraudulent activities, or as you audit, you look out for those fraud if there are any. Though fraud is the responsibility of management if you are doing an audit. But our businesses must avoid anything to do with money laundering, terrorist financing, corruption, bribery, misappropriation of assets. All those are under the Anti-Money Laundering Act. It also talks about accountants in practice and potential ethical issues. The part of ethics that talks about accountants, they try to introduce us to two forms or two ways that if when you graduate, you could be employed probably as a CFO, as an accountant. Those are called accountants in business. Not necessarily that you have a firm, but also it considers accountants who are in audit firms, who are employed. But then the second category is about accountants in practice. So we need to know the roles and potential ethical issues. You know our fundamental principles, that's where they come in. Integrity, independence, being objective, confidentiality, professional behavior, they're under that part. Unfortunately, because students here auditing and professional ethics, all that they concentrate on is the code of ethics and those fundamental principles. Now that's a wrong perception. The examiner has said most of the time students talk about integrity, independence throughout the paper. That is just a component of professional ethics. But we need to know ethics in business. We need to know how to whistleblow. We need to know the consequences if someone reports. How is someone protected? Okay, whom do you report to? All those things are there. So basically, it's about ethical behavior and workplace. And lastly, as this part of the syllabus, it introduces us to what is ethical. What do you consider to be right or wrong? Is it on the legal basis? Is it on a moral basis? What do some scholars say about ethics? So we have some ethical theories. There are some scholars who believe that right or wrong is clear-cut. It's black and white. Why? That if something is not right here, probably even in another society, it wouldn't be right. Others say no. It is relative. Probably it depends on what that society believes in, and it considers to be right or wrong. So there is those absolutism. There are those ones who act because they believe that whatever I do has to benefit the greatest good, the greatest number of people. So I should do this because of that interest. Otherwise, others probably consider their ego. They consider their personalities, that if it benefits me, then it is good, it is right. So that part of the syllabus, professional ethics and values, in summary, will introduce us to how people how they believe, what they believe to be right or wrong, depending on their basis, depending on their beliefs, depending on their training, depending on the societies they have been brought up with. So how does audit comes about? Now audit comes in because these companies will be audited. It's a requirement by law. So that will take us to one of the forms of auditing, or the types of auditing, that businesses, whether it is your firm, if you have your own firm and it is registered, you'll be required to make returns to ISPAO. As a business, it's also required to make returns to the Register of Companies. Therefore, the partners would want another party to check what is going on. They'll bring on board auditors. So that is where auditing comes in. Whether it's your own firm, whether you are employed, okay, in a company that is being audited, or whether you are from an audit firm and you are going to audit a company. So in the syllabus, we are required to know the different types of auditing. As I told you when I was starting, that the audit theory here is basically external audit. That's the perspective you should have. So are there other types? Yes. We have internal audit, it's part of the syllabus. But in brief, we are supposed to know about forensic investigation. If there is some form of fraud, you'd expect third parties to come and investigate to get evidence that is suitable for courts of law. We have compliance audits. We have value for money audits. We have different forms of audits. The examiner can ask that because we are required to know. So some audits are statutory, they are required by law. Others are voluntary. So we need to know why someone would go ahead to request for an audit if it's not required for statutory purposes. And those audits, that is the first slide up there, the first box. Those audits are carried out by practitioners. They are carried out by auditors. They are carried out by you when you get your practicing licenses. They are carried out by people who are competent. They are supposed to be independent in mind and in appearance. So that is auditing. And when we go to audit, there are things we assume to be right, that we are auditing financial statements because we are looking at external audits. An audit is not just carried out anyhow. We are required to know the legal requirements. We have standards. We have international standards on auditing. We have our local requirements in the Companies Act. Those extracts, so the information we need to know from the Companies Act are also in the text. So we have the Penal Code. We have Anti-Money Laundering Act. We have the Whistleblowers Act. We have the Code of Ethics. Now, are brought in the Companies Act. Because the Companies Act clearly spells out the appointment, remuneration of auditors, the kind of report they are going to give, their roles, some of the other requirements in the report, they are all in the Companies Act. All that information is in the text. So, we have auditors carrying out these audits. They have regulatory requirements, including the Code of Ethics, okay? And they can also do internal auditing, okay? So if you accept a job, you accept to audit a client, whether it's a bank, whether it's a manufacturing company, whether it is a school, any client you have, depending on the industry, it is important that you plan your audit. You plan it so that the work is done more efficiently. You plan your audit so that you are able to maximize the use of resources. You plan your audit so that you are able to achieve your objectives. You plan, you assess risk, you understand the controls. If they are automated, you also understand such controls. You are able then to come up with audit procedures to determine the work you're going to do. The bigger part of our work in external audit is during the planning phase, because that's when we understand the business, that is when we assess risk that is facing the business, and therefore also determine materiality levels. That is the time we are able to determine which procedures which work methods we are going to use, which staff will be deployed. That is at that time. So we plan, we go and carry out our audit procedures, we get our evidence. The work might be on a sample basis for some of the work, others we can do 100%, depending on the risk in the work. And then finally, we evaluate our evidence and come up with an audit report. Are there any possibilities of fraud? Is there any risk? Something material is something substantial that will affect economic decisions of users, as she was trying to explain. Okay? So that's why they are talking about material. A misstatement could be anything that arises out of error, or fraud, or failure to disclose. Those three. So risk of material misstatement. Fraud, by the way, is a misstatement. It is material by nature because it is intended, whether it's a small amount or big amounts. So what could bring about fraud here? In this case, that number 2. Okay? The money, the funds are deposited on the supervisor's personal account. Probably that could increase. So when planning, we should note out, probably as you write your answer, that when planning for the case, you should be alert to the possibility of fraud, which could arise as a result of sending money to the site supervisor's personal bank account. So I want to repeat that, probably using different words. That risk of material misstatement is increased when AUL continues to send money to the supervisor's bank account. As we have seen in the case, now we are trying to discuss it further, that the people are signing for more than, we are signing more than once, unclaimed wages are not remitted. So that increases risk of material misstatement. What else increases risk of material misstatement? They don't authorize new casual workers. So therefore, it means that they are likely to have ghosts casual workers. That area is prone to fraud. There's a risk that financial statements are going to be materially misstated. That financial statements will have problems because you are sending money to, because you are not computing the pay as you earn, someone is not reviewing. Risk will increase because you still, the payroll has duplicate names, it's not cleaned. You have fictitious names. Because risk is increasing because other staff are signing for their colleagues. You are still paying dead, so the wage bill is going to be inflated and all that. That is how you pick out risk of material misstatement arising out of fraud. There's a possibility of fraud if you continue sending money to the supervisor. If people continue signing for colleagues, if you use attendance registers to make payments, for people to sign for their money, there's a risk in that. Okay? 5 marks. Probably we need to have 5 well explained, or at least 4. Risk of material misstatements. Then part C talks about postulates. I earlier on told you I'm not going to discuss postulates. Postulates are assumptions. Audit postulates are those things which are held to be true when auditing. So when you are carrying out external audits, there are things that, there are assumptions There are things we assumed that will be there. I told you this paper, it is external audits, except that topic of internal audit. So what is assumed to be true? That one, financial statements exist, because those are the ones you are going to audit. The financials are free from material misstatements. They don't have errors, those things. It is assumed that the AUL has put in place controls that will enable it to present financials which are free from material misstatements. That is an assumption. That management of AUL takes responsibility for those financial statements. Where we are picking wages, those are assumptions. Financials are available, they are verifiable, they are free from errors, they are being prepared based on general accepted accounting principles or policies. Then on the side of the auditor, it is assumed that this auditor is independent, has no conflict of interest, much as it didn't go through a tendering process. Those are things you tell the examiner so that they know you understand the case. Okay? We assume that the auditor will get evidence on which to base his opinion. Those are things that are held to be true. We don't need very many, probably 4. Well explained. Well explained. To get the 4 marks, or to get that 1 mark for each, you have well explained. Then they have told us to explain matters that Clever and Associates should have considered before accepting the terms of engagement. These people didn't go through a tendering process, but much as they didn't, it is important for them to agree the terms, to have an engagement letter. But before that, what should they have agreed on? Matters that they should have considered before accepting the terms of engagement. Usually when it's a new engagement, they have told us that your firm recently, in the first paragraph, accepted a new engagement at AFCON. If it's a new engagement, you can't just take it on unless you have knowledge about that industry. These guys are in engineering. You have at least audited, or one of your staff has audited an engineering company. You can go to the site. You know about bills of quantities. You know about those, where they sign. You can know this is the cement. This is how to measure sand that they have used. You can do that. So that if they give you a list of casuals, you are not angars. You don't just accept everything. So one of the things they should have considered is whether they have knowledge about the engineering business. Don't just say knowledge of the business. Because someone has given you a case, you talk about the industry they're in. They should have considered the integrity of management, because we expect the site supervisors to be a big person. But the site supervisors are here sending lists to head office for payment when in the northern region there was no construction at that time. You saw that on the next page? That number 7? Okay? They are deducting, the CFO is part of management. So they should have considered management integrity. How do we present our answers? You can say management integrity. Then you say Clever and Associates. It is important they should have considered the integrity of management, like CFO, site supervisors, because those are high-level managers. They are managing sites before accepting. Otherwise, they are likely to give an opinion which is not appropriate. Okay? So we have seen knowledge of the business. Do they know about engineering? We have talked about, and we are picking that from the case, we have talked about the skills, their personnel. We have talked about management integrity. We need to consider whether there is limitation on scope, whether these people will give us information. Examine the risks AUL would have faced in conducting a tendering process to offer audit. services. Now, another thing I want to say before we conclude this question is that the examiner can have different topics in here. So you need to go when you are aware. So we need to read the entire syllabus. And it has not been happening. There's also a likelihood to have ethics and audit and entrepreneurship in a question. Would that be confusing? No. Because the things are linked. They can ask about professional, your fundamental principles. They can combine that in a question. It's on the syllabus. So you prepare for that. How do we prepare? We need to understand the text. It is something that can happen. It has not been happening so often. It used to happen, but it can happen. Here, these people were lucky it was only audit in this question. But what we need to know, they don't just say controls, because now the information on controls and internal controls, that one is in planning. Risk of material misstatement is in planning. Postulates is before you accept. This one is during acceptance. Tendering is before you accept. They can bring anything. They can even put reports. Because it's on the syllabus, they can combine. I just wanted to mention that. So our last part is before the tendering process. Why is the examiner talking about that? Because in the first paragraph, they said without accepted a new engagement at AFCON without any tendering process. So what does the examiner want? Examine the risks AUL would have faced. You should be careful. Whom are they talking about? They can also talk about the firm. The risk of accepting without going through the tendering. But this time they are talking about the business. 6, probably we can examine 6 of them. And in this case, this company, the engineering firm, the risks it would have faced in conducting a tendering process. One is the need, determining the need or the specifications of the job. Because if you are going to put in the papers or you are going to publish on the ISPA website, then the audit firms need to know what exactly do you want us to do. The question says, examine the risks they would have faced in conducting a tendering process. Probably the specifications could be either they could have under-specified or they could have been more. If they are more, then they are scaring away firms that could have done that work. That is a risk. It's on specifications of the work. There's a risk on the bidding, the evaluating the bids. Because when you put out information there, then you expect different firms to respond. So there's that process of evaluating bids. Maybe the people evaluating might not have knowledge. They just consider maybe the name of the firm and experience without considering the experience of that firm in auditing engineering. There is a risk of fraud, connivance. The procurement guy is doing that because not everyone is involved in evaluating bids. Okay? Or there's a risk that some of the firms might connive to set a certain range and say, okay, let's agree on this, because sometimes they give the least bidder. So there's a risk also at another stage of awarding a contract to a firm which cannot do the work. The paperwork was smart, but they can't do the work. Or if they can do the work, there's some variation. They'll add other things, maybe we didn't consider this, maybe reimbursables, those things. There's a risk. So when you go for this paper, much as you have read that book, also use a common sense approach. So here we have 4 questions, section B. We have 4 questions and we are required to do 3. And as earlier said, the questions are a mixture of ethics and audit. We have been having that because basing on the history that one of the questions, if it is ethics, then we shall have less questions in section B for ethics. But I don't want to take that because it's not written anywhere. Yeah, but that is what has been happening. Our role is to cover the syllabus. So for these ones, we shall not go into much detail because I want to have that interaction with you. Question B, they had evaluate the decision of outsourcing the internal audit function. So we have internal audit. Explain the factors that determine the extent to which DALU will rely on substantive analytical procedures of the audit. So we have, it's still internal audit, but because the methods used by internal audit are somehow similar to the methods used by external auditors, so substantive analytical procedures come in. Now the language, I told you we have our language. And it could be that some of the students maybe fail because of that. I'm just thinking right now. Because if someone say now analytical, now what? Now procedures, probably. So we need to read and we need to discuss. Because you might have read and understood it the wrong way. That's why maybe the examiner said students gave audit tests. So it's not that they don't know, maybe the language. Okay, so the language, we need to understand those terminologies. Maybe it is not hard, but the language, people don't understand this language. Still, this is internal audit. So we understand the language, but we also need to appreciate the keywords, those driving words, so that we know how to answer. So evaluation, you need to look at the pros and cons so that you don't miss out. It makes a difference between 45 and 50. Then the examiner said most candidates did not give sufficient answers. So let's maximize. Let's assume it is 1 point. Well explained. Because for this paper, you have enough time. You have enough time so that we are able to make it. So this one is basically about internal audit. Internal audit, when you're looking at that topic, you start from planning, how it's their plan, they plan the work, how they do the work. It also has its own reports and all that. Maybe something I need to say, I think I didn't mention it, that I talked about the regulatory requirements, that we have international standards on auditing. In most cases, if you read audit reports for different companies, you'll find that the structure is the same. Our work is done in a systematic way. It is based on standards. So as you do your reading, you'll find in the text when they say, ISA this says this. So it's important you also know those standards. Okay? Question 3 is ethics, because here they are talking about presentation. Question 1 was about a memo. That was the format. This question is talking about presentation, so you need to know those formats. Basically, they were looking at workplace harassment, sexual harassment, effects for marks, cases to students. I think you know what is happening in society. Makere, I think they had issues there at that time. Then these philosophical approaches to ethics. We shall not go into details, but want to see what the examiner said. Most candidates demonstrated a good understanding of different forms of sexual harassment and the effects of sex for marks. So one of the topics, workplace ethics, has this work discrimination and sexual harassment. I think students understand it. Most of you are working and you know these things. Most students couldn't give the philosophical approaches that related to the scenario, and a few that were able to give the theories couldn't explain. Now we have that part of the theories. Students, I think, don't like it, but the theories are easy. That if someone is making an ethical or a decision, what is their basis? Do they make a decision because they know that's the right thing to do? It has always been like that. Every other person will judge it in the same way. Those are absolutisms. Or they are making a decision based on the society they live in or their workplace, basing on their norms. Relativism. Okay? Recently there was something hot before the locust business came in, when one of the ministers was saying, okay, that culture, what they are doing is not right. It's relative. Because other cultures, the Baganda kingdom and all that, were coming up and saying, no, this is our culture. Other people are saying, no, that shouldn't be done. So it is relative. Okay. So question 4 was also ethics. They are looking at, now the language comes back. Second opinion, audit fees, illicit advertising, opinion shopping, lowballing. It's that language. We have nothing to do. It is our language, we need to embrace it. Okay? So, the challenge was that most candidates could not explain well the guidance on the code. I think I saw somewhere that they were able to define. They gave insufficient answers for this question, only giving the definition of second opinion and audit fees. Let's see how the question was. Explain the guidance of the code of ethics on second opinion and audit fees. How would you get the 5 marks? Those key terms, you need to describe them. So probably one had to get a mark on second opinion and get a mark on audit fees. Those are 2 marks. Then the 3 marks, you had to describe the guidance given by ISPAL. Second opinion is where a practitioner is requested to give an opinion on financial statements where they are not their auditors. So that would give you a mark. You don't have to use the exact words the way it is in the code, but as long as what you have written will convince the examiner that you know, then they will give you your mark. Audit fees is the remuneration, the fees the auditors or practitioners earn when they offer professional services. Now, the second part is guidance on second opinion. Because you are not the auditor, there's a risk that you can come up with an inappropriate opinion. So companies, like we talked about AUL, maybe I will refer to that, they have their own auditors. But they can seek for an opinion. Like you go to a doctor, the doctor says, you could be diabetic. You say, I need a second opinion. You go to another doctor. Okay? So for us professionals, the risk here and where guidance is given, you can give an opinion based on different facts. So, or they can create undue pressure. So the guidance given by the code, that's what the examiner expected, that you talk about that second opinions are likely to exert undue pressure to the practitioner. There's a risk that the practitioner can base their opinion on different facts that were not based on by the auditor of the company. Okay? You get your mark or 2. And also the code does not discourage. They said, but they should be done in a professional manner. So it is important that you contact the the auditor of the company, so that they know you're going to offer that service. And then audit fees, the guidance is that fees or the need for financial gain should not impair the need for quality, okay, or the need for independence. That fees are set depending, then you give the basis of fees. The basis of fees are set depending on the seniority of the team you are giving, depending on the scope of the work, the nature of assignment, depending on the perceived risk, okay? So that is the basis. That's how we come up with fees, and that is the guidance given by the institute. So that is how you get the 5 marks. These ones I don't need to go into detail, but opinion shopping, discuss the impact of opinion shopping and lowballing. Lowballing is quoting a commercially lower fee to be able to get an audit assignment. You see it, okay. Then opinion shopping is where a client, like AUL probably, is wants an interpretation on accounting treatment. They are seeking your opinion on that. And in most cases, they want someone who will agree with them. Okay? So, those are the things that the examiner, probably that's where people got the 22%. Question 5 is also ethics question. Now, in most cases, you'll find that the paper, if you go back in time, has a question that has those acts where I need to refer to the act, those legal perspectives. And this was the nature of question. Remember when I was introducing the subject, I looked at the Penal Code, we looked at the Anti-Money Laundering Act, we looked at Whistleblowers Act, we also mentioned the Companies Act and the Code of Ethics. You don't need to gather all this. They are there in the text. So you need to know those. In most cases, you'll find a question that is based on those legal requirements. Like this question 5, okay? What the police spokesperson meant by holding criminal property. These definitions, occasional transactions, they are in the Act, the Anti-Money Laundering Act. So there's no way about it, apart from getting different methods and techniques used by criminal organizations to launder the dirty money. Those ones are also in the Act. So if you answer anything outside that, you wouldn't earn a mark. Okay? For such questions, general knowledge approach doesn't work, because they refer you to the Act. Discuss the provisions of the Anti-Money Laundering Act on the objectives of Financial Intelligence Authority, various offenses. Now, the examiner said students gave general offenses. As long as they are not in that Act, you will not pass that, because the question is based on that Act. Okay, claims of promoting and all that. Let's see what the examiner put. Very few candidates could explain holding criminal property and other occasional transactions. I think when the examiner gave statistics, very few passed that part, okay, of the Act. Some candidates scored no marks because they explained the anti-money laundering process. That process of placement, layering, and integration. Okay? Instead of giving specific methods and techniques used by criminals. So an example would be, you can still mention your layering. Then the specific methods would be that money is wired in different financial institutions, including tax havens. That's a method under layering. Or you could say under layering that these criminals would buy different properties. They're trying to disguise this money. That is a form of layering. Or they'll make fictitious payments. They'll pay commissions. So it is under layering, but you need to explain those methods So students who gave the process got it wrong. Another technique, kindly understand. Try to read and understand. Take time to understand the requirement. Okay? Question 6, they told us everything was okay, except that candidates failed to refer to the case study. Some of them misinterpreted the question and provided forms of corporate social responsibility. And another issue that they gave less number of points. Make sure you give as much as possible if you have the time, but of course you time yourself. Even if you know the points, as long as you have exhausted your time, move to another question so that you pick the easy marks. Okay. Question 7, remember question 6 and 7, you pick one. That is section C, it's entrepreneurship. And what's the pass rate for that? We see 82% or 83 if we round off, were able to score more than 15% of the marks. We have not seen an 82% somewhere. Not so? So what does that mean? It's a cash cow. She has not heard us. Yeah? Not that you should spend all that time, but make sure you pass that question. It is a cash cow. We need to understand the case for question 1. It's important that we read the case and understand it. Of course, we time ourselves. It doesn't mean that we are going to spend too much time on this. Okay? Then we must plan. You have time. At least you plan your answer so that it's flowing, but you know you exhaust the marks. And then give sufficient points. Give the explanation. Relate your answer to the case. But finally, we must cover the entire syllabus. It is important. And when you are looking at the syllabus, take note of the language. Take note of those terms. You need to understand those terms very well. We have talked about the legal other laws. It is important that you also consider them. But we have enough in our text. Current issues, we have locusts now. I don't know. We have so many current issues because the text talks about emerging issues. Even in the profession, remember you have business and the environment. Hey, what if your client is a farmer in Amudat, Nakapiripirit? And also, probably I didn't talk about it. In the audit questions, your financial accounting knowledge helps a lot. Have you seen questions which have figures other than the ones we saw on pay as you earn, where they give you a set of financials? You've done accounting. Hey, so it's assumed knowledge. Okay, read the question. We've talked about that. We have been looking at question approach. Kindly follow the instructions. I think we have shared. Maybe I need to hear from you.